And I'm going to spotlight our president.
Good morning. I'm Linda Corso, co-president of the Sunshine Women's Probus Club. I'll be your chair today. Welcome back, Sunshine Probus members, and a very warm welcome to our guests from other District 4 clubs. We're thrilled to have you, and we welcome our very special guests, the Honorable Dr. David and Sharon Johnston. One of the few advantages of this pandemic is our ability to host this meeting today and to have you all join us. We are so pleased to have you. Before we get started, I just want to express sincere thanks to all of you who worked so hard to make this event come together today, especially membership, program committee, and the Zoom team. Thank you. And now let's get started. I'm now going to turn the meeting over to Donna Robinson, who will introduce our special guests.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It is my great honor and privilege this morning to introduce two very special guests to our Sunshine Probus Club meeting. His Excellency David Johnston and Mrs. Johnston are no strangers to Waterloo. We have been blessed with your presence and leadership for many years, and you've certainly left an indelible mark on our community. Both Mr. and Mrs. Johnston are deeply committed to learning. Each of them has earned a PhD. Mr. Johnston studied law and held many university positions prior to coming to Waterloo as president of the University of Waterloo. And Mrs. Johnston began her career as a psychiatric physical therapist and went on to earn a PhD in rehabilitation science at McGill. Additionally, both Mr. and Mrs. Johnston have been granted several honorary degrees acknowledging the contributions that they've made during their careers. In 2010, Dr. David Johnston was appointed Governor General of Canada and held that post until 2017. And we know that Sharon Johnston was an active participant in their lives in Rideau Hall. Married in 1965, the Johnstons have celebrated 58 years of marriage. With 5 daughters, they have had a lively life parenting and now enjoy being grandparents to 11 grandchildren. Sports, particularly hockey and horses, have been an important part of their lives. When their daughters were young, they had a family team known as 5 girls and an old man. I have also learned that they enjoy entertaining and share the kitchen as they prepare for their guests. Spiced beef and wonderful cinnamon buns are among their culinary triumphs. And so we welcome Mr. and Mrs. David Johnston, parents, grandparents, chefs, writers, scholars, presenters, diplomats, and amazing role models for all of us. I want to say welcome back to Waterloo, even if it is by Zoom. Of course, the purpose or the main thrust of the conversation this morning will be on the books that you have both written. But because you spent so many years with us here in Kitchener-Waterloo, I will be asking a question or two about your experiences here and your role, the role of Governor General. Many of the stories have been included in the book Trust. So let's proceed. The first question really is a question for both of you. Mr. Johnston, in your book Trust, you write about many people that you've met in the role of Governor General. But the person about whom I've received many questions from our Probus members is your meeting with the Queen. Can you please tell the story of your weekend at Balmoral, how you prepare to meet the Queen? What were your first words of greeting? And Mrs. Johnston, we want you to chime in on this and tell us your version of the story too.
Well, Donna, I think we need a whole weekend to tell you about that weekend. It was so filled with wonderful experiences. But first of all, thank you for that generous introduction. And you're right about the hockey team. It was the 5 girls and the old man, but it was also, and the young wife who was the coach. That's how we were styled in the games that we played with the daughters. Thank you to Donna, to you and to your Probus members across the province and Retired Teachers Association. What a delight for us to be with you on this almost 2 days after Labor Day occasion and celebrating Canada. And I should say, I'm just so touched by hearing that national anthem so magnificently sung and led by the 3 tenors, that great Canadian artistic group, and what pride one has in this country when one sees those scenes across the country. I think that would be one of the messages we have from the privilege we had of being in Rideau Hall for 7 years, seeing a good country and realizing just how good it is indeed. Let me come right to your question about the weekend we spent at Balmoral. The custom for an incoming Governor General of Canada, and I presume any one of the other realms of the Commonwealth that recognize the Queen as our sovereign, is one visits the Queen usually at Buckingham Palace and usually for tea or occasionally lunch, and one is sworn in and receives the declaration of office and so on. We were really lucky. I was named in, I think in July, and was to be sworn in October. And the invitation came from the Queen for us to come and visit before we were sworn in, actually in the month of August. And we were very lucky because the Queen and her husband typically spend the month of August at Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands. It's about a 50,000 acre estate, and they secure the perimeter of the estate. But the castle, which is really just a big old manor house, has very, very relaxed rules. And we went there expecting a very formal weekend, and was anything but. The preamble to it was that in June, I had been named as Governor General, but it was not publicly known. And Sharon and I attended a function at the Royal York Hotel in Toronto where the Queen and Prince Philip were on a state visit. And as we were going through the assembly line and we came to the receiving line and we came to her, she greeted us both with the usual, how do you do? Nice to see you. And then as we left the line, she looked at me and she said, I look forward to seeing you soon. And with the warmest smile you can imagine. And of course, this was highly secret. Mr. Harper, the Prime Minister, knew about it, and his immediate aide did, and the members of the 5-person selection committee who recommended me knew it, and the Queen and her husband knew about it, but that was it. It was a secret. But her greeting was from that very instance, just very warm. So we arrived at Balmoral Castle, and there was the Queen and Prince Philip on the doorstep waiting for us. And from the moment we met them, it was very clear that we were there as friends. This wasn't an official function, and we were simply to enjoy ourselves. We sat down on the Friday evening for dinner, and the Queen, in her very organized way, and what I want to emphasize is the graciousness of these two people. And one doesn't see this in the public persona, but Queen in particular is a wonderfully down-to-earth, practical person, and just as gracious as you can imagine. And she was saying, well, here's our plan. And she says, Sharon loves horses as I do, so we're going to spend Saturday morning in the stables. And Sharon smiled, and then all of a sudden quirked a bit, and she said, but I don't have any shoes. We had come with,
No, I had shoes, but they were high heels.
there you are. We had come with every stitch of formal clothing you can imagine, and we didn't put a stitch of it on for the whole weekend. So Prince Philip looked under the table at Sharon's feet and then looked to his Queen and says, same size, I think. The Queen goes up to her bedroom and she comes back down with a pair of her brogues, and Sharon puts them on, and that's what she wore for the weekend. And that was the signal of the weekend we spent with them at Balmoral. It was absolutely marvelous. Sharon may fill in more details, but we ended the visit with the two of them seeing us off as if we were long lost friends. And the Queen said to me, I do read letters, you know. And I said, well, thank you, Your Majesty. I will write, and when they become dull and boring, you let me know and I'll cease and desist. So I followed the custom of sending her a letter about every quarter, and continued that through the 7 years. And it was a wonderful relationship by correspondence. And these were not the typical diplomatic letters from an ambassador, but sort of insights into Canada. Enough on Balmoral, but it does indicate the wonderful graciousness of the Queen and how welcome she and her husband made us feel on that weekend together.
So I have a Waterloo story. So we started off introducing the Queen to Waterloo. The big thing was, what gift were we going to give her? So we gave the Queen, the Queen normally does not open her gifts, but she always opened our gifts. And we gave her a queen-sized Mennonite patchwork quilt. And it was made by a Mennonite with one arm. And she was so touched. She really wanted everybody to see this quilt that was made by somebody in Waterloo. So that's the Waterloo story. The other thing I wanted to say is in terms of horses, we did go on the tour and be in her shoes, but we finally got to one paddock and there was a horse there, one little horse. And so I said, oh my gosh, I said, that's a halflinger. And I said, I have a halflinger. I said, what's your halflinger's name? She said, Katie. So she said, well, what's your halflinger's name? I said, Majesty. And we had a good laugh over that. So she did open our presents. And the other, we gave her a beautiful dressage whip that was made in Germany, especially for her, just our last meeting with her. And she took it and she started whipping it around and said, oh, this is like fly fishing. So she was very huge. She had a good sense of humor. Anyway, those are my stories.
They could go on, Donna.
Okay, well, sadly, we don't have all day for this, so we'll change gears a bit now. And Mr. Johnston, this is specific to your book. Of all the values that impact your life, what prompted you to write a book about trust?
Well, first of all, Donna, why don't you call us David and Sharon? This is a family gathering.
Yes.
It was
Kellyanne told me that you would say that.
was the fourth book that I wrote with a team when I was at Rideau Hall. The first was The Idea of Canada, Letters to a Nation, which is my custom of writing letters in the morning to different people, but it was trying to capture the essence of this marvelous Canada and what is its idea and its fundamental virtues. And then the next two books were on innovation, one for adults and the other for children, really focusing on innovations in Canadian history. And we now have that old book is in, I think, virtually every high school in the country, and the children's book in every primary school, and have had a program to try to encourage innovation amongst young people. The book on trust was driven by my concern about the diminution of trust in public institutions and more generally in our society. We can go into detail on that. But trust is a very fundamental concept. It's both the grease and the glue that both holds our society together and permits our society to work in a more functional and smoother way. George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, and Secretary of Labor in the United States government, who just passed away at 99 years old, once said that trust is the coin of the realm. If you have trust in a room, whether it's the family room, the office room, the military room, the training room, everything goes well. And when you don't, it doesn't. Everything else is detail. And so it was really to call attention to trust as a fundamental virtue and value in Canadian society, beginning with how do we become and be trustworthy persons ourselves? How do we then engender trust in our neighborhoods? That's our dog just echoing, yes, she's right. He's very good at answering at the right time. How do we engender trust in our enterprises, in our businesses, in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our communities? And how do we establish trust in our nation, a trusted nation? And so the book is really developing those three themes: individual, associations of a more immediate kind, and then trust in the nation. So that was the book on trust.
Okay, thank you. It seems appropriate to ask the next question because, of course, this is back to school week for many students across Canada. But you write about teachers as builders of trust and encourage people to cherish their teachers. This theme, as I said, seems very appropriate this week. But you don't necessarily mean teachers in the traditional sense. You mentioned Clara Hughes, Chris Hadfield, Christopher Plummer, and others who you describe as teachers. So please tell us more about that.
Well, the first thing I should say, Donna, is I suppose that started, and in fact, the books that I've mentioned started with my installation address in October 2010, which was entitled A Smart and Caring Nation, A Call to Service. Smart and caring nation, and both adjectives are important. They reinforce one another. And during the course of that address, I said, if you remember only 3 words of what I say today, they are cherish our teachers. Because apart from our family, they have the most important influence on the lives of young people. I said, if we had 4 or 5 hours together in the Senate chamber, I'd tell you 100 stories of teachers, coaches, mentors, peers who've influenced my life for the better by virtue of the values that they have and what they stand for. And I guess one example of that, I actually did give it the one example, is I had the wonderful opportunity to go from a Northern Ontario town to Harvard for my undergraduate degree and played hockey there. And our coach was Cooney Weiland, who grew up near Stratford, Ontario, with a grade 10 education. He was the first Harvard coach not to be a Harvard graduate, let alone a university graduate. He had a grade 10 education when he went into professional hockey, played the Boston Bruins, leading scorer in the National Hockey League in the early 30s and so on, then coached Boston and became, as a professional, to a coach at Harvard, which was unthinkable. And he had a profound influence on us, not simply as teaching us how to play hockey as a team sport, but our own character development. And when he passed away, I had the privilege of being one of the people who gave a eulogy to him at Memorial Chapel at Harvard. And there were 500 people there in the church, overfilled, half of them being old hockey players, and then other half being professors and staff at Harvard. And I said, when the history of our civilization is written in 100 years' time, this institution will be regarded as one of the strong influences for good in our society. And why is that so? It's because of great teachers, and we honor one today, the hockey coach. And he was a great teacher, and I've been blessed in my life to have had great mentors, leaders, teachers, etc. And it makes a difference.
Thank you for that. And of course, you have to recognize that you're one of those great teachers and leaders and mentors for many of us who have followed your career and appreciated your contributions. You were both a teacher and a leader while you lived in Waterloo Region, and you have left a legacy that has impacted us. What was your proudest or most challenging accomplishment while you were here?
Well, we spent 12 wonderful years in Waterloo, Donna. We came in 1999 to the University of Waterloo and then left in 2010. And I joke that I'm sure somewhere in the halls of Waterloo, University of Waterloo, there must be a plaque that has the names of the various presidents since its beginning in 1957. And I suspect beside my name, there'd be 1999 to 2010, and then an asterisk, and the asterisk might read below, required to resign by government decree. I think that may or may not exist, but I would have continued, I guess, forever at the University of Waterloo, but I was asked to come to Ottawa, and it concluded that that was probably a good thing to do. Sharon took a little persuasion, but she was a good soldier and did. We just have the most wonderful memories of there, as she indicated with the reference to the quilt. We lived on a farm just west of Heidelberg in Mennonite country. Our neighbors were all horse and buggy people, and it was a 10-minute drive or 30-minute bike ride from the university. Imagine that, being in city university and then 10 minutes away, you're on a farm. And these Mennonites were wonderful neighbors. And so we'll have cherished memories of what we learned from these people, where I was crossing the country speaking about Canada's technology triangle and the innovation that comes from that and the productivity and so on. And I'd go home each evening to people who made very careful choices about what technology was useful in their lives and what was not necessary. A wonderful feature of perspective. I guess the two of the takeaways that maybe have been most important to me was, one, the concept of barn raising, which was a Mennonite concept, but to me, that's a symbol of Waterloo County, barn raising, helping one's neighbor. When a new person comes into town, you help them build their barn or whatever, metaphorically, and that applies to this notion of being a smart and caring community. It is smart and it values being smart and intelligent, but it's a very caring community. The other thing I would say is how that concept manifested it so well in the University of Waterloo, which was a bit of an upstart. When I arrived, it was, I think, about 45 years old, or longer. And it had achieved a prominence that you would not have expected in such a young university. 40 years is a relatively short period of time in the history of the university and its acclaim, et cetera. But it had, because it had been so innovative and so prepared to take different paths, and was quite successful. It was a manifestation of the community. So on the 50th anniversary, we had a celebration with a barbecue at lunchtime for the staff and students and so on to say 50 wonderful years. And our government relations people had organized a reception for the elected members of different governments at 5 o'clock in our faculty club. And the idea was for us to thank them and their predecessors who, as council members or mayors of the cities, the regional of Waterloo, provincial legislators and federal legislators, to say thank you for what you have done and your predecessors have done to establish a supportive environment where this university has had such remarkable success over 50 years. And the night before, I was just preparing my remarks to that gathering, and the theme of the remarks was, this university belongs to this community. This community has made it and has expressed its values of smart and caring so well in it. And just as I was going to the reception, one of our government relations people said, have you seen the local newspaper, the record? And I said, well, no, I usually read it in the evening. They said, well, the headline, look at it. It was congratulations on 50 great years, and a nice story. And then there was the editorial piece. And the title of the editorial was, this community belongs to this university, reversing exactly what I've said. So I came up to the gathering and I began to speak, and I handed out the newspaper with this heading and indicate my title was, this university belongs to this community, and the opposite version, I said, these are not contradictions, both are right. This is a symbiotic relationship between a community and its university. And the university has shown its finest values in building an institution that reflects the smart and caring concept. So that for me is a great takeaway. And the notion of barn raising is one that has been very much part of our Waterloo heritage. Sharon, you can add to that.
Well, we love living in Waterloo. And what I will share with you is that we invited all of our Mennonite neighbors to Rideau Hall, which they love. They took the train, we picked them up, and they came, and the order of the day was that there would be no televisions in the bedroom and there'd be no booze served. And they had just an absolutely wonderful time, and they went to Parliament. The one thing that was really clear with the Mennonite neighbors that we had is they really thought the Queen was very special. They respected the crown. So I think that's a nice addition here. Back to David.
Back to you, Donna.
Okay, okay, thank you. What a great response. Now I'm going to try something new off my lips. Sharon,
Yeah.
David just said that you were very generous and gracious and got around to the idea of moving to Ottawa. And you had said in something that I've read in the last day about being able to adapt, and how being able to adapt has been a major part of what has made your marriage a success and your parallel careers a success. But I want to move on and talk a bit about Patchwork Society, the book that you have most recently written. It is largely built on relationships and experiences that you had as you were growing up. And I'm curious about how and when you knew that this story was going to become a novel.
Well, that's a good question, Dawn. And first of all, I wanted to thank everyone for giving me a chance to talk about my book. But when I finished my doctorate at McGill in rehabilitation science, I felt that I did not want to go and do a postdoctorate. I was not going to be a faculty member, and I felt that that was not going to be helpful. And at that time, there was something that I guess was ruminating in my mind, and that is that war in some way had influenced, affected, somehow or other changed our family. And so I thought, I'm going to write about war. And initially I was going to write War Casualties 1 and War Casualties 2, referring to the first and Second World War. But then I thought, okay, I don't know how to write. So I went to Humber College, which is really, I have recommended it to people and they have been so happy. So in the Faculty of Creative Arts, I took a course. First of all, it was a 1-week course, and they had publishers and various people associated with the writing industry. And then I took an 8-month course. And what they do is they monitor, and even Margaret Atwood did this years ago, they monitor either 300 pages or 8 months. And so and they won't take you as a student in that program unless you have submitted 10 pages of what would be your novel. So that's how I started. And believe me, writing, you cannot write unless you can take criticism. So what you initially write is usually just horrible. But it taught me the basic tenets of writing. And that's when I started the first book. So Humber, I highly recommend that program, and it's still in existence.
So I'm the unpaid, untutored agent for my wife.
Because I must
Donna.
thank him too.
No, thanks. But just to say that my writing has been nonfiction. In fact, the next book along is Empathy, which is continuation of the Spartan Caring theme. But what Sharon writes is historical fiction, and hers goes over 50 years, built on our family history. So the first book, called Matrons and Madams, is about her mother, who came as a widowed nurse from England. Grandmother, widowed nurse from UK. Her husband, a Scottish engineer, was gassed in the trenches and died a grisly death at home, and lost her only son, Sharon's mom's brother, in the influenza, and came to start a new life as a single mom in Lethbridge, Alberta, being the superintendent of the hospital there. And it's called Matrons and Madams because she was the matron, and a madam was a woman whose husband had been killed in a mine explosion, and she ran a brothel just to earn her keep. So that was an interesting contrast there. And then the second book, Patchwork Society, that Sharon will speak about, was her grandmother then came to Sault Ste. Marie, where we grew up, and she had lost her job in.
Now he's telling my story. This is a disaster. He's just.
Here's the rest of the story at the end of it.
Donna, I just have to say this. You asked me. We have worked in a symbiotic relationship from the time he was a dean, and then he was at McGill, and then he's at Waterloo, and then he's a governor general. I've been his partner in what he's done and so on. But I absolutely refuse for him to take over my book right now.
You would say usually it's the long suffering part.
This is marriage. We've been married a very long time. Is there a marriage counselor in the crowd? Anyone watching, if you're a marriage counselor, well, then jump in.
This interview is getting a little more personal than we planned on.
Oh, dear.
In any event, the second story is Patchwork Society growing up in Sault Ste. Marie, and it's the many different cultures that really made up that unique city and make up the country. And the third one that she's about halfway through the writing.
Don't tell that too.
Not yet.
The Boy in the Orange Pajamas, and that's about our generation. And I was her first date in high school at age 13, and we've been married now 57 years. If I'm not that boy in the orange pajamas, there's going to be some very difficult dinner conversations. I should say, here's the commercial, that all the royalties for Sharon's books go to the research at the Royal Ottawa Mental Hospital. She's had a lifelong interest in mental health, and all the royalties for my books go to the Rideau Hall Foundation, which we set up when I was at Rideau Hall to amplify the outreach of the Office of the Governor General. Over to you, my dear.
All right.
So we'll start with our presentation.
So are we going to see the slideshow now? Oh,
Yes,
okay.
going to see exactly.
Yeah,
Going.
okay.
We can skip over the part where David has already described what's going on. That'll save time.
One moment. There we go. Can you see our screen?
We just
That's
have to go
pretty
back.
good.
Yeah, we just have to go back. There we go.
Excuse me.
Just let me go.
Sorry about that.
That's no problem. So before I actually get into the book itself, I just wanted to share with you, this is the farm. That is the farm where we lived for the 12 years, our horse farm. We loved it. And that's where David got the ask to be the Governor General. So the next one, we're going to, there, no,
Excuse
sorry,
me.
we just, not to worry. There, what, Jess?
There we go.
I wanted to share with you because you had asked about Balmoral. Here we are thanking the Queen for her many kindnesses over 7 years. And it's so nice. We're saying goodbye. And you can see, I think in that photo, there's a great deal of warmth. So I just wanted to share that with you before
And
I.
Sharon, that goodbye is when we're stepping down 7 years later. It's not Balmoral.
No, it isn't. But you talked about, well, it's all right. I take corrections well. There we are. It just shows the warmth. Now, the overarching theme, first of all, I want to thank everybody very much, and I'm very sincere in taking interest, and I'm very grateful that David has taken an interest. The overarching theme of my the trilogy, the 3 books, is that when there's a catastrophic event such as war, 3 things happen: fatherlessness, economic hardship, and a change of address, or you're not living in the same place. There we go. So whoops, no, we can go back to me. So Matrons and Madams, here we are. There's Matrons and Madams, the book cover. Matrons and Madams is the first in the trilogy. The story takes place in Lethbridge, Alberta, following the First World War. The matron, Claire, as David said, is based on my grandmother, who was a well-trained British nurse whose husband died from German gassing. That you already know. She was offered the job of superintendent at the Galt Hospital in Lethbridge. The madam, Lily Barnaby, based on a natural person, was a widowed school teacher who ran a brothel to support her son. That you already know. Lethbridge had a prominent red light district, excuse me, called the segregated area, where prostitutes could work without offending the finer ladies in town. Tuesday afternoons, the ladies of the night could do their shopping, while the respectable ladies stayed home. The arrangement came apart with the war. Lethbridge had the highest per capita enlistment in the First World War. It also had the highest incidence of venereal disease when the soldiers returned. They were giving the disease to their wives and to the prostitutes. Into this crisis, Clara Durling, with her no-nonsense attitude, arrives from England with her 5-year-old daughter, Ivy. The hospital board asked Clara to establish the first ever venereal disease clinic in Canada, given the health crisis in Lethbridge. To do this, she must gain the cooperation of the prostitute with Lily Barnaby's help. While Clara is heavily occupied running the hospital, there we go, we're going to see a picture of Ivy, very sad. While Clara is heavily occupied running the hospital, Ivy lives a lonely life, being attended to by her nurses or students called probationers. She longs for a normal home where she could invite school friends over. Indeed, her classmates nicknamed her Ether because she, of course, was growing up in a hospital. There we go, the next slide.
And Ivy is your mom.
No, Ivy isn't my mother. The 100-bed Galt Hospital was performing poorly when Claire arrived. Procedures needed to be upgraded and standardized before the American College of Surgeons would accredit the hospital. Clara did achieve this. However, after 10 years of effectively running the hospital, Clara lost her job. In my research of the meticulously kept hospital board notes, I found that in the records, 1 page in 1927 was missing. So we will never know what happened to Clara. It will remain a mystery. Clara moved, as David said, he pointed out Sault Ste. Marie. We loved growing. No, we have to go back. We have to see the picture of the Sault. There we go. You can see that Sault Ste. Marie is at the confluence of the 3 Great Lakes. Today, more than 7,000 freighters pass through the Sault locks in every shipping season. There's a 21-foot drop between Lake Superior and Lake Huron. The Sault has a centuries-old Indigenous history. Thousands of Ojibwe and Cree came annually because of the white fishing spawning grounds. Hundreds of European immigrants were also attracted to the Sault for jobs in industries, and well-educated white men, attracted by opportunities in the north, came to run the plants and provide professional services. There we go. But we are looking now at the Shinwalk Residential School in 1930. Clara still had Ivy to support. She accepted the job of nurse matron at the dilapidated Shinwalk Indian Residential School. It had been condemned by the local fire department years earlier. In revealing the historical facts of Clara's 6 years as nurse matron at Shinwalk, I relied on many letters and documents shown next. That is the historical or factual part of the story. All right, we're going to see these 3 documents. There we are. Anyway, it doesn't, we'll get that. But the first letter is a letter from a letter to the Indian agent Sims from school inspector D.T. Walcombe. It says, the smallest desks in the school are size 3 non-adjustable. About 8 or 10 little ones are seated in entirely unsuitable seats. One row of 5 adjustable number 3 with an extra rear and extra front would make an enormous improvement. What you do have to think now is, would that ever happen? Would you ever be pleading for a better sized desk if parents were in charge? The next slide, I'll just go over briefly. The principal is asking for gardening tools and seeds and prizes for the children so they can learn something that would be useful when they leave. The total sum is only $100. But you can see that both these letters, the power is entrusted to the Indian agents to have anything done. And often there were huge delays. It could be as long as a year.
And needed permission from Ottawa.
Needed permission from Ottawa, exactly. So the final one is the drowning of Dudley Schilling in the novel. And he's a 16-year-old boy and he drowns, and there is no inquest. And there's no inquest. And what am I looking at here? The policy that, yes, so the doctor says we don't need an inquest because the custodians, they say what happened. In fact, the principal had a completely different version from the little boys that were on the picnic, but that he ignored. And so we can see again, if parents were involved, you would never have a child drown and not have an inquest and get to the bottom of it. So now we are to Patchwork Society, and there's just the front cover. Patchwork Society begins the beginning of the Shinwalk school year. Hair is being chopped off, and Clara uses kerosene, a horrible thing, to delouse the children's heads. Ponytails, sacred to young men, are lopped off and pitched in a wooden stove. The Indian Act of 1876, under John A. Macdonald, began the policy to remove the Indians' well-established culture in order to assimilate them into white man's ways. By 1920, the Indian Act had mandated that every Indian child on a reserve must attend a residential school. Removed from their homes and parents, the government became their sole custodian. This is a sad picture. Siblings were separated on arrival to suppress communicating in their native language. The frightened face of these children suggests they were removed from their parents by the police. This often happened because parents were charged if they did not give up the children to the Indian agent or other government authorities. The children were then warehoused in overcrowded dormitories, and a school might start with 100, and then as the pressure from the government mounted, there would sometimes be 200. Communicable diseases like tuberculosis, diphtheria, smallpox, and influenza passed rapidly through the school. Treaty Indians could only be admitted to a sanatorium on the recommendation of a government agent. In other words, non-treaty Indians could go to a sanatorium. Consent was usually delayed. Children with tuberculosis would then be sent home, thus infecting their own community. So now we're back to Ivy. Marriage and a home were the security Ivy wanted. Red was expanding his business and introducing novel building products, such as blown insulation and ready-mix concrete into Northern Ontario.
Red was her husband.
Yes, Red was her husband. Now, yes, so, no, nope, there we are. Here we are. We're looking at the house that Red, who was my father and her husband. While Claire is treating sickness in the residential school, Ivy finishes her last year of high school and enters nursing school at Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal. Ivy is smitten with handsome Red Donnelly, who is in medical school in Toronto. Red, the oldest son, quits medicine to take over the family building supply business when his father unexpectedly dies. Now I'm going to let my husband jump in here and that thing at the side of the church, but I'll just read this. Red promises Ivy the home she never had. He sends her the plans for the house on Hilltop Crescent. Ivy longs for the stability of a neighborhood where her children can grow up. She quits nursing school in her second year to marry Red. And if we just go back one, just note how big that the side of that property is. Can you see? That's a very, very big property to build a house. So they were starting well. She was 20 and he was 22 years of age. So marriage and a home with the security Ivy wanted. Red was expanding his business and introducing novel products. And I'm going to let David talk about what you see the chap that looks like a monkey.
And that man at the corner of the church there is not a terrorist with a gun. He in fact has got a blower that is blowing confetti over onto the married couple. But the confetti in fact is blown insulation, which Red had pioneered in Sault Ste. Marie with his building materials company. And he also pioneered ready-mix concrete. But this church is the same church in which Sharon and I were married as well, St. Luke's Cathedral. So this is a very nostalgic picture for us.
There we go. There we go. Red purchased a 30-foot cruiser. He named the Ivy League, so that's they're sitting on the boat to entertain their friends. What we have here are the president and vice president of the steel company and Sir James Dunn's personal physician, along with their wives, and they are enjoying a boat ride. So they were obviously doing well, and they were obviously a part of the upper crust society, successful people. Ivy obviously has adopted the outdoor way of life. This is not the way she was brought up in the hospital that Red so much enjoyed. And she had so much difficulty in the hospital. It's clear that having pals and being there. So everything looks happy, big house and handsome husband and one wonderful cruiser and so on. And this is a marriage that should survive. Whoops. Where do we go? Yeah, there we go. However, what we're seeing here are the Sault Ste. Marie young men of age, of enlisting age. They are marching down the main street. So the onset of the Second World War now brings trauma to Ivy's life. Red, whose kidney had been removed at 16, was not among them. And I imagine my father standing under the awnings in a silk suit, hating himself. The question I ask is, did womanizing seem a manly alternative? We may never know.
He tried to enlist several times, but he couldn't because of the kidney. And so he was barred from serving in World War II.
Right. And so now we see from that happy Ivy, showing off her fish. Now we see her alone on a Christmas Eve, looking into the fire and saying to herself, how did my ideal life spiral down? So war for a second time has traumatized her family. Clara, now retired, helps Ivy get on her feet. There you see Ivy, quite a different person from standing in front of the fire. Ivy begins a 2-month course in Toronto to become a welfare officer. At that time, my sister and I stayed with Clara, our grandmother. The manager of the Bank of Montreal refuses to lend money to buy a car she will need to work. And David could step in there and talk about the bank manager if you want.
That's enough. He just wouldn't let her give her the loan without her husband signing the guarantee. And
her ex-husband.
Her ex-husband they were divorced.
That's right. So she had to go back to her mother and ask her to do it. So, and so she does guarantee the loan. So my Ivy at this point is now becoming a career woman, quite different from her life that she started with Red, and she moves into a small office in the courthouse surrounded by lawyers and the courtrooms, and she is handed 1,200 welfare files. Now this is a very important photo. I just want you on the right-hand side of the screen. That is the corner of Red's house. That is plopped right in the middle of that big lawn that you saw.
Red's no longer in the big house.
No,
I sold.
That's a good thing to say. Well, she wouldn't have built the house beside him. Faced with economic hardship after her divorce, Ivy ignored city bylaws that give some idea of her character and constructed a small house beside the home that Red had provided when they were first married. This meant she and her girls could remain on Hilltop. And it's in that small house that David Johnston courted me, and that house actually was income producing. So that these are huge economic changes for my mother to go from that big house to the little house and actually earning income on the house as well as living in it. So this next slide is interesting. We have a very large Italian community in Sault Ste. Marie, but this is James Street. We called it Jimmy Street, which is a bit pejorative. And this was the Italian commercial hub in the Soo. Many Italians lost their job during the Depression and resorted to bootlegging to make ends meet. That could often mean a jail term. You can jump in anytime.
I'm very careful,
No,
especially on the bootlegging.
Ivy often advised the lawyers on mitigating circumstances for their clients to keep them out of jail. So here we have David and Sharon Johnston and the dog, and we have just done our last event at Rideau Hall, and we are walking up that long driveway to say goodbye to the staff, and we are going to be taken to our farm, which is 40 minutes to the west of Ottawa. So the third and final book in the family saga is entitled, as David said, The Boy in the Orange Pajamas. The First World War radically changed Clara's life. The Second World War altered Ivy's. Both women suffered economic hardship, change of living circumstances, and the absence of a father. The Boy in the Orange Pajamas will touch on the far-reaching influence war has on three generations of a family. And certainly I can end by saying my family, my mother, my grandmother, and my sister, they clearly wanted me to have the security that my grandmother and my mother did not. And I dated David from the time I was 14, and The Boy in the Orange Pajamas will be a sort of soft brushed impressionistic account of David. Everybody knows he's the youngest dean and the youngest university president and the governor general. But this will paint the kind of picture of the man that I married. And I didn't marry him to be important or successful. I married him to be a very special partner to me, which he is.
Well, and this boy is terrified about what I'm going to read in that book. I think I'll move through Argentina or Brazil for 6 months.
I think we've been married too long.
Yeah, earlier today, Sharon asked for the marriage counselor, but you may be asking
Comes
too.
out.
You've got the whole 9 yards, the full Monty here.
Okay, so Sharon, I was going to ask you about your current book about Patchwork Society and what part was your favorite to write. But what I might ask you is what part of the third book do you think will be your favorite to write?
Well, about 1/3 of it is written now. And the problem I will have is I think people know the public life. And so our life has been very interesting. And so it starts off with us partly in the courting phase, but then we're just sort of kind of 21 years of age. And we're off in Cambridge, England. That was just for a year. And that will be a very funny part. It was very funny living in Cambridge, and it was a different way of life. And then, of course, where do I stop and what do I put in? I clearly want to have the law school when David was the youngest dean. I think you were 27. And that again will be a humorous part, but there's two things here. It's how David operates. If I've known him since I was 14, just a very short period, he didn't like me anymore, and then he came back to me.
I think I'm back in that not like phase.
So, in any event, so when he went to the law school, many of the professors, they were professors, but they wanted to live like lawyers. And so they were moonlighting and they were doing arbitration. And so David came in to this situation, and he in the 70s, you can imagine the kinds of law, securities law, privacy, family law. David can talk about that, but there were so many things in the law that the professors could be so keenly interested in, not just making money in sideline events that they were doing. And so to see how he would get a Supreme Court justice or publishers and so on, we were big runners. By then I had 5 children under 7. So I had to run to get rid of my nerves with all those kids. And we would run past the law school, and the lights were always off on a Friday afternoon. 3 years later, we would run by and all the lights were on, and David can talk about that. So then the law school then goes to McGill. And that, of course, in 1979, everybody was moving out. We're moving in. And that was in some ways catastrophic for my poor children, putting them into an entirely French school, but it was the best decision we've ever made. And so that will be very interesting. And probably I'll have to end with the referendums. I won't get to Waterloo. That will be a different book, which David wants me to write more about being at Rideau Hall. So David, you pop in.
That's the story. On to your next question, Donna. I'm terrified of
Okay, well, Sharon, my next question has to do with Rideau Hall, actually. And clearly you have valued the ability to write and your publishing of your books. But when you were the wife of the Governor General and also the wife of David, but the Governor General, how did you find time? How did you manage to maintain your own goals and activities? And did you find it difficult to create time and space that would enable you to do that?
Well, that's a great question. And the first thing is that mental health, I started off as actually a psychiatric OT with children. I was just 21 years of age. So I was very well supported. When I said I would like to be able to use this office and the things that are made available to me to support mental health. So I was very well supported. For writing, I could not have done that. There was a huge office that was given to the spouse, and I said I wouldn't even want to go in there, let alone work in there. And so that became a conference room, and I had a little wee tiny office just by the doors that took you out into the lovely Rideau Hall Gardens. But I went to Tremblant. We have a wonderful house at Tremblant, and I would go up there and I would work from early in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, at which point I would pour myself a glass of wine. I almost took up smoking like Mordecai, but I didn't. And that's where I wrote. Literally, that book was finished at Tremblant because David was totally looked after. I knew that he was going to be fed. He was involved. He was, completely engaged in what he was doing. And I would just take myself away and I would stay there for 10 days and write from morning to night. And that's how I managed to finish.
It's actually a very important observation, Donna, and we all face it. 24 hours in a day, how do you prioritize? And for us, 5 daughters and 14 grandchildren now, family's been a very big part of our life. And how do you protect that? How do you do the other official things and have a little time for fun? We all face that, but the time, the single most difficult feature of life in Rideau Hall for the 7 years was just prioritizing the time. And, you can be going from 7:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night, 7 days a week, week after week, and just drive yourself into exhaustion. So we had to be pretty conscious of trying to make those decisions thoughtfully.
Which I think he did terribly, but anyway, he said yes to everything.
Lots of energy. So what aspects of the roles and experiences in Rideau Hall took you by surprise? What had you not anticipated in that building, in that space, in that role?
Right. So that really is a good question. And it's a personal question because there is no privacy. There are cameras everywhere at our house. Eventually, we bought our wonderful farm west of Ottawa, and we could go there on weekends and have a place. And even at Tremblant, there were cameras all around the house, cameras all around our house out near the Carleton place. And there were cameras everywhere. And so I went up to the command post.
These are video cameras, surveillance cameras.
Yeah, everything you did, if you rubbed your nose, they saw you rubbing your nose. So what I did is I went up to the command post and just got familiar with what they see and the person that would run it. It would be a RCMP officer and so on. And so I guess what I realized is that if it was the kitchen people that happened to look in the camera and saw me, or if it was somewhere else, they really loved us. We have throughout our life, we have had a huge amount of love in our professional lives. People have really cared genuinely about us, and they did at Rideau Hall. So we had so much affection. Who cares if somebody is looking at you when there is this element of real honest caring? Never did I feel pride upon, not at any time. There was a level of discretion and there was a level of real kindness and I will say love that was there. So who cares if someone's looking at you?
Actually, there's some funny stories that come out of that caring. On one occasion that we were there about 2 or 3 years, and it's about 11:30 at night. I was fast asleep, of course. And Sharon asked me, "Can you hear that?" And I said, "No, I can't hear it." And I said, "Hear that? Listen." I said, "No, I can't hear it." She says, "Well, there's a buzzing noise." And I said, "Well, I'm sure there isn't." "Yes, there is." I said, "Well, it's probably the Russians. They've got a microphone here and it's on the fritz." And she says, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, it could be." And I go back to sleep, and she gets up and starts prowling around.
Well, with a pillow under my arm, because I'm going to find another place to sleep. I'm not going to sleep in the bedroom where the Russians are spying on me.
Well, the buzzing is still going on, and by this time I'm awake again. And she goes to the far, and she says, "Interesting, the buzzing stops whenever I got here." As well, they probably realized that you've spotted the microphone, so they turned it off. I going on that way. And looking around, she sees a button on the wall just by the windowsill that she hadn't seen before. And she says, "Maybe that's it." And she presses this button. 15 seconds later,
a police officer with a gun pointing at me and my pillow.
Because that's the alarm that something has happened. And we had to explain that, no, we don't think any intruder is in. And they prowled around for a little bit and couldn't find anything except there were some plants there. And they said, the noise stops when we go near the plants. It may be something in the plants, but there's nothing that harms you. So we'll leave you be, let you back.
They were
So
Florida crickets.
that next day, the people from the greenhouse came up and they said they'd put new plants in our bedroom, and they discovered that they were crickets there. So it wasn't Russian microphones, it was the Florida crickets that were that evening. But it was kind of fun.
At least they were friendly crickets.
So they were very protective of us.
I can tell that. I can also understand why you would feel such love coming from your staff, because you're just such warm people.
They really did care about us.
So I'm going to go off script a little bit here and ask a question that one of our members invited me to ask. And it's asking about the celebratory nature of both roles, the university president role and the governor general role, where you've got certain events and procedures where it's ceremonial, and how you would compare the two. And I know I've gone off script, so you haven't had time to think about this at all.
On vacations versus.
Yeah, well, the general theme is why do we have ceremonies anyway, Donna, and why do we celebrate? It's an expression of joy, it's an expression of pride, and usually a recognition of accomplishment. And I'm a great believer in ceremonies that do exactly that. I think, in fact, we Canadians tend to be a little bit de minimis by our nature, that we don't draw attention to ourselves, and we're a little reluctant to draw attention to celebrate others, just by virtue of don't make a spectacle, don't make a show. I think we should overcome that and say, we have so many things to be proud of in this country. We are the most blessed country in the world, without any arrogance in that statement, when you just think of what we have, the opportunity available to us, et cetera. And, in taking that and becoming a smarter and more caring nation, as a kind of legacy, as a responsibility, as a stewardship, you look for teaching occasions, and celebrations do that. So a university convocation does that. It's interesting, a university convocation is usually 2 hours long, and the families that are there are interested in only one minute of that, and that's when their son or daughter or nephew or niece, et cetera, is crossing the stage. But those are great occasions. And equally, at Rideau Hall, we would have many ceremonies of honors. And the honor system in Canada is totally non-political. It's lodged in the head of state function, which is different than the head of government function. And it had no influence whatsoever from political arm of government, as so many honor systems elsewhere around the world do. And so it's honors like Order of Canada, Sovereign's Medal and Volunteerism, Order of Military Merit, Bravery, on and on and on. These are all occasions where true merit is being recognized, and it's not influenced by power. It's influenced by a recognition of people who've made a contribution to this country, which is noteworthy. And of all the honors, the one that was most attractive to me was the Sovereign's Medal of Volunteerism, because it was for the unsung heroes, the people that year after year run the local food bank, or the Meals on Wheels, or coaching a hockey team for kids, et cetera, Special Olympics, you name it. And these are not people who are looking for acclaim themselves. And when you honor them with the medal, they say, well, heavens, I was just doing what you're supposed to do, but think about all the other volunteers. But the importance of that is to encourage us all to be smarter and more caring about the other, about our communities, et cetera. And then to celebrate that, because that's a way of saying these are values that are worth perpetuating and strengthening, particularly in young people. So for me, ceremonies, both at the university and at Rideau Hall, were an important part of reinforcing trust in our society and our nation, and recognizing people who've made their contribution for a better country, and encouraging others to say, what's special about those? Like those teachers and coaches and mentors that meant a lot to me in my growing up. What's special about those people, and why should I emulate what they're doing.
Okay, thank you. So we have two final questions. The first one is, it comes from your writing. Both of you emphasize the importance of increasing our bonds with Indigenous populations in Canada. You've each had many experiences with Indigenous populations. From your experience, and going back to your book, David, about trust, using trust as a parameter, what steps do you think we as Canadians need to take now to build stronger and healthier relationships with our Indigenous peoples?
Well, I think it's as simple as understanding, at least that's the beginning of the journey, understanding our Indigenous people, understanding their history and coming to know them, not just as another that's out there and kind of forgotten, etc., but vital parts of our history, in our pre-European settlement history, and the contribution they've made to this country, Canada, the second largest landmass in the world, the largest coastline in the world, etc., huge landmass, and occupying it and developing it. Sharon and I are both honorary witnesses to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And the duty of honorary witness is, first of all, is to see, to observe with your eyes. Second is to listen carefully to the stories, to the history, etc. And then third is to bear witness, not to say this is how we go and fix things or this what must be done, but to bear witness of what the history has been and what the particular cultures have been and what has been the place in the nation. And then hand in hand, nothing about us without us being the First Nations people, work towards a situation where Indigenous people feel as comfortable as non-Indigenous people, and we see the two streams of a patchwork society coming together in a kind of common whole without having to change your culture an awful lot or abandon who you are, as we try to do with the residential schools, but living together in a kind of harmony and feeling as one did with the barn raiser concept of helping one another to build barns. The program that we run at Rideau Hall Foundation, of many that operate in this space of equality of opportunity, is an Indigenous teachers program where we hope to eliminate the gap in education between Indigenous and non-Indigenous children by developing a strong cadre of Indigenous teachers. At the present time, I think Indigenous teachers are about 1/3 of what you'd expect from their population, 4 to 5% in the country. We should have that at least equal or even more young Indigenous students going into teaching than the population would suggest. And so it's a program where you identify young First Nations, Indigenous people as early as grade school and track them through high school with scholarship help, with mentoring, with special opportunities to be camp counselors, to be teachers' assistants, etc., and then do a B.Ed degree at one of the faculties of education across the country, working closely with the local Indigenous communities, and graduate a cadre of people who see teaching as a noble profession and education as the new buffalo for Indigenous people. That, for me, is the kind of constructive step forward in reconciliation, hand in hand, working for a better life for our Indigenous people, just as we believe is a better life for the next generation of non-Indigenous people. Sharon, you might.
And you speak of that program eloquently in the book, for sure. Yeah. Sharon?
I think David has given a much more sort of professional account of what we can do for Aboriginal people. I can't really speak. I'm not Indigenous, but certainly I could tell my grandmother's story, which I did, and researched that. And as I grew up, I did not know my grandmother was a nurse matron in the residential school, but I was being looked after by girls from the Shinwalk, Indian girls, we thought of them, and even an Eskimo girl called Betty, because my mother was working. And when we went to the cottage, we had to have babysitters and people to look after us. And so I was often at the Shinwalk, having a Sunday dinner or whatever. I'd pillow fights with the kids. And as an honorary witness, when it was my time to speak, I gave my apology and said, I never asked those children if they missed their parents. But what I do feel with the Kamloops, which of course made Patchwork Society become a little bit more interesting as they started to discover their graves, I tried to show two elements of kindness where they're looking for gardening tools. The government, of course, were the parents, insensitive, and and also, school inspector trying to get seats for the kids that were appropriate. And at the same time, when a child drowns, there's no inquest. They're not going to listen to the children. And so I feel that I hope there was so much death. I hope that the scientists and the people that go in with various types of equipment in acknowledging the terrible thing that happened, that they can try to bring science to help us understand the conditions in which people were working, the overcrowding, lack of ventilation, no fire escapes, and that we could be educated. And I'll just quickly say, when people acknowledge the land in which they're speaking, then I wish they would actually not just do it like a rote message, but that they would actually talk about, this is what happened. I'm speaking from this particular place. This is what happened. This was a fight or a war or something. So almost like teaching young people history, we don't get too complicated. So I hope out of the Kamloops that we try to understand how these things were happening and don't just use the word abuse.
Okay, thank you. As we come to the end of this conversation, it seems only reasonable to focus on the future. Have you made plans or set goals for your future activities? Where is life leading you now?
Well, I'm going to get a fat bike. So I've decided we have this gym, and David, of course, he's so fit and he goes down there an hour and a half, and I don't know, it doesn't smell like a commercial gym. So I said, well, I'm not going to exercise indoors with winter, so I'm getting a fat bike. So you'll see the former Her Excellency out in the trails and on a fat bike.
Now you need the interpretation of that answer. Number one, the fat bike is one that can go over the snow. You put big.
Everybody knows where the fat bike is.
And we fitness, we're so lucky to be healthy, and physical and mental illness are gifts, and so you work at it. And her complaint about me is we've got a little exercise room in the basement. I go down every morning. It's the first thing I do each day is my exercise. And yeah, I do sweat. That's the whole point of the thing.
I just bought a dozen towels at Waymart.
It's like the burnt toast. That's another interesting story. But that's just part of our life. I'm not sure whether we look very far ahead, Donna, because I think both of us have kind of lived for the day. People often ask me, what was the best job you ever had? Or, what was the best experience? And I would say the here and now. And if you'd asked me that 10 years ago, I would have said the here and now. And we're just so lucky. We're lucky to live in this country. We're lucky to have had the education we've had. We're lucky to have the support we've had through our lives. And I guess for us, it's our 5 daughters and our 14 grandchildren, and watching life through their eyes now. I say all the important things in life I've learned from my children and my wife, and now I'm learning them again from my grandchildren. And then just looking this magnificent country, and so long as we're healthy and able, continuing to try to do our bit to make it a smart and more caring nation.
Thank you so
getting a
much.
fat bike.
We'll end with the fat bike.
We really, for people our age, and I think we're a good model for aging, because we really are fit. I ride my horse 3 or 4 times a week, and we're out biking. And and every day to get over this COVID, we walk 5 kilometers. We have a beautiful walking path. And the other thing is we have a beautiful home that's really as nice as Rideau Hall. It's hard to believe. And we do share that. So people have conferences here and they meet, and whether it's mental health or whether it's concussions or whatever it is, they come and they use this wonderful property and have breakout sessions and so on. So David and I have been very, very lucky our whole entire life. And I think we share that.
And so stop complaining about my exercise in the morning, because instead of a fat bike, you'll have a fat husband.
That's awesome.
Okay. It has been a real privilege and a pleasure to spend time with you this morning. Something that I would never have anticipated in my entire life, but this has been a real highlight for me. I appreciate your willingness to allow us to explore some of your inner thoughts, and especially your candor in addressing some of the questions, and of course the humor that has peppered it as well. It's now time to turn the program over to Marg Ryrie, one of our Sunshine Probus members, who will thank you more fully. So this ends our formal presentation.
Thank you, Donna.
We thank you very fully, Donna.
Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. On behalf of the Women's Sunshine Probus Club and all of our other Probus Club guests, I would like to thank both of you for presenting us with the most informative, enjoyable interview. I especially liked hearing about your weekend with Queen Elizabeth II and about your all-encompassing ideas of what kinds of teachers there are and that we can all aspire to be. I now look forward to reading more of the books that you both have written. We have followed your paths for many years since we had the good fortune to have you here in our community. It has been wonderful to reconnect with you. As a thank you, we plan to make a donation to two of your charities, the Rideau Hall Foundation, which you initiated, and the Royal Ottawa Mental Health Center.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you all. Keep healthy. God bless.
We have enjoyed having Probus Club guests to our meeting. I would like to thank everyone and would encourage you to take a 2-minute stand up and stretch break before the rest of the meeting continues for the Sunshine Probus Club members.
Well, it wasn't
From, oops, I'm from